What's up, guys? It's Frito here for Your Overwatch. In today's video, I wanted to take a more specific look at the experimental card and see if there's any changes we think could help Overwatch in any way. A lot of them are wacky, but I think some of them have some promise. We'll discuss that, and as well, if this is a suitable way for Blizzard to try to save Overwatch by toying around with the mechanics. Is that enough to hold us over until Overwatch 2? We'll get into it.
Let's face it, if you're like me, you stare at screens way too much during the day. But can you blame us? Our entire lives are on screens. Whether it's work, entertainment, food, dating, gaming, everything's there. And you probably already know that blue light from these screens is really bad for you. Blue light emitting from these screens can create headaches, eye strain, and trouble falling asleep. As if Overwatch isn't stressful enough, the eye strain from the screen was also giving me problems. But we're in luck, because GMG glasses can help us out. GMG glasses have built-in blue light protection, which makes them amazing for minimizing those symptoms, and my biggest concern, personally, is as I get older, I can feel my eyes getting worse. Blue light protection helps you maintain your eyesight longer in life, so I can look at more screens later in my life. GMG glasses has a ton of different frames to choose from. I was blown away by the selection, personally. It's often more good ones than you see when you go to a store. I'm rocking the GMG Oranos myself, but I also think the optimizers look really smart. You're gonna find one that you really like. I already think their prices are super affordable, but they're also going on a deep discount for the holidays.
It's a Black Friday extended deal. Get 50% off, but you gotta act fast. This deal ends December 7th.
Buy one for yourself or a gift for a friend. Remember, the gift of health means so much more than some goofy little trinket. Take our link in the description to head on over to GMG Glasses and you'll find a pair that you love. These holiday deals are crazy and you're not gonna wanna miss out. Click our link right now.
So first, I want to get into my favorite changes and the philosophy of why I like them. The first one we'll look at is Lucio, which sets a trend for my preferences that I think as Overwatch ages as a game, they had to start to move away from the really simplistic design they launched with, which is why a tank hero at the launch of Overwatch might just be Winston, who has only a few buttons. But years later, when they added a tank like Sigma, he had a handful of interactions and his ultimate did 50% of the max health of a thing, and it's just really complicated to understand in comparison to where they first started designing. These Lucio changes, along with a lot of others, kind of fit that newer principle of adding gameplay complexity, that if you were to master something such as increasing your fire rate while wall riding, you may not necessarily need to know Lucio does that in order to function at a base level in the game, but it's something extra that you could learn to master higher up on the skill curve, which just gives more depth to the characters. And also, I'll say, when the characters have more complex parts to them, it's a bit easier for the devs to balance, I think. On one hand, having more complexity just makes them overall stronger, no matter what it is. But on the other hand, when heroes are a bit more complex, there's more levers for the developers to tune, which is part of the principle behind the Overwatch 2 role passives, for example. The one change that I think players might get a little skittish about is the sound barrier insta-kill when you land on someone, but considering how a lot of supports fit this mold of complexity, I think it's warranted. Think about how much flexibility a newer character like Baptiste has, considering he has the quick offensive threat of his ultimate and the quick defensive play of Immortality Field. In comparison, Lucio, without some sort of insane play to make other than booping someone off the map, just doesn't have as many interactions to his playbook. Insta-killing with an ult is outrageous, but at the same time, maybe just move out of the way. It kind of gives value to the playmaking of dodging it, and of course, slower characters are more likely to get nuked by the ultimate, and perhaps not infinite damage is a good balance point, but doing some damage seems reasonable. I think I've seen a workshop mod where maybe he could do more damage the higher up he goes. Like, that's the kind of complexity that I think is like tunable, right? And at the end of the day, with a lot of these character interactions, I start to think, is it just fun to interact with? A lot of people didn't like the D.Va remake, but I think after it's been tuned back, we've kind of gotten used to the fact that it's a threat you have to play around. I think the sound barrier dunk on an enemy would feel the same way once we got used to it. I mean, remember, like, Lucio can be interrupted with his ultimate and lose it. So going in at someone who could stun you might be a massive mistake. Other changes I'm a big fan of are the idea of adding mobility to characters. A controversial one, I bet, would be the Pharah changes. changes, which they also later added more changes to this experimental card that I didn't have time to cover. But being able to move while ulting would be a bit OP, but as well, the drop speed to fall like a Tetris block when you're dive bombing enemies is massively powerful in the individual player's hands. But remember, this came coupled with a mercy nerf that made pocketing a single target much weaker, which I think is the route that Overwatch 2 should go. Give more tools to the individual and make teamwork kind of inherently a little less effective, or at the very least, a little less easy than just strapping a mercy to a Pharah nonstop. Easy teamwork that lands too much value, I think is safe to say should get a little bit of tweaks in the complexity department, so it's a little harder to pull off, which if you look at some of the reworks they've proposed for Overwatch 2, kind of seems to be the case when something like Sombra's hack only applies for a second to disable abilities, which means your combos need to come in fast, rather than feel the enemy is just disabled for a eternity, right? So it makes me wonder how many of these changes are influenced purely by the creators, or how much was a collaboration between them and the developers. I watched some of Flat's content on this, and he seemed to say that there was a bit of a back and forth for the devs to kind of realize his vision, because the creator's not going to memorize all the necessary breakpoints necessarily. The devs can kind of make those ideas a reality, so there might be more of a collaboration than you think. Otherwise, two that are kind of easy for me to say that I don't think it would break the game to add would be Zarya being able to at least rocket jump herself. I think maybe knocking enemies this far with knockback might be a bit over the top, but if you've played either Team Fortress 2 or I played Quake as a kid and loved it, the momentum of rocket jumping is one of the most exciting things in shooter games ever, in my opinion. And because Zarya's ult fire is so ammo expensive anyway, I kind of don't mind that she gets this added mobility. Keep in mind, she might need a thing like this in order to compete as a single tank in Overwatch 2. In a similar vein, Roadhog's whole hog, in order to get him to an elevated position, is also expensive to do that. Like, using whole hog, you want to use it at the enemy to knock them off the map or deal damage. So if you point it at the ground to push yourself up in the air to get somewhere to make a next play, there's a cost to that. So it's not just like a straight stat buff that makes Roadhog better all the time. It instead allows Roadhog to do more interesting things like interact with the environment and set up a play. The type of thing that he might need if he loses a lot of his tank busting capability. At this point, I want to transition some of my discussion on this to talk about a philosophical difference that it was very clear in Flat's instruction on this experimental card was a goal, which is to say main tanks are biased in the tank balancing. That might sound like a weird thing to say for a lot of Overwatch fans. Well, main tanks are so good, you always need a main tank. But I think over the past couple years, Blizzard didn't really hold firm to that as a concept, especially when they started trashing barrier health. Then it started to feel like they were a little bit more agnostic to what tank you should pick. And if you want to pick 2 off tanks, well, that can be valid. And often now, that feels much easier to play than running a main tank at all, due to the power kind of scaling towards a character like Roadhog, not only feeling really tanky, but bullying tanks, which is a thing I also don't really like. I think it's a little silly for Roadhog to be able to pick off squishies easily and tank bust on the front line. These numbers have been tweaked around a lot, and of course, the Gigahog era was the most egregious version of this, but there's still some aspect of it that leaves a sour taste in my mouth, where it feels tanky designed characters can't tank up against a character like Roadhog, who can just blow them away. So you sort of have to pick things in order to play that frag game, and then you're just like playing deathmatch and not playing tank anymore. I think this point is a bit more controversial than a lot of hardcore Overwatch fans might like to admit, because a lot of us vocal on the internet are biased towards, let's say, traditional Overwatch with Reinhardt and Winston. But I think a lot of casual players don't really even want to be playing tank at all. So when they pick tank, they want the shooter type tanks to be good. So that makes it kind of tricky for Blizzard to balance, and thus why we're losing a tank in Overwatch 2. Speaking of main tanks, I'll go further to say that I think these Winston buffs are kind of outrageous, that he goes faster and farther with his leap, deals damage from his launch location, not just his landing, and has 1500 extra health. So he's faster, more healthy, more tanky, and that's just like overwhelming amounts of main tank stats. But maybe that's what's needed in order to combat these other shooter-minded tanks. Maybe main tanks just have to have this level of stats in order to compete. Because like we said earlier, they're just more simple characters fundamentally. But that's not the case when we look at the Reinhardt changes, where This is where you start to ask yourself, do you want tank balance to be biased towards main tanks or not? Because this is almost the level it has to be, this level of insanity, to give Ryan this many things in order to keep him at the top of the meta, assuming you think playing with and against main tanks is fun, and I think a lot of us do. Ryan getting a lot of his Overwatch 2 buffs, canceling pin, 2 fire strikes, which is just amazing. This build has the most shield health that I'll think he'll ever get ever again. 2,000 shield health is ridiculous. So strong that in contrast to the other tanks, you might feel like you have to pick a Reinhardt, or your team will simply take way more damage than the enemy, which is how main tanks used to feel in years past, which is kind of the conflict here, right? It used to feel like if you didn't have a main tank, your whole team fell over, and it was really brutally punishing not to have one. But now, with the tanks more balanced, quote unquote, you don't necessarily need one to win, but that means, well, they're kind of weak. So we can't have it both ways. Us as a community, we have to figure out what we actually want. And while I don't think we're getting anything like this, with Reinhardt insta-killing a lot of things, doing 400 damage with a direct hit of Earthshatter, I do think there's some happy medium to be reached here in Overwatch 2 when you only can pick one tank at a time. Other changes I like is buffs to Ana, who struggles to compete against the more complex characters and feels really all in, but super playable and fun, but also like super risky to play in so many situations because she's just so punishing if you miss her abilities and shots. So being able to nano herself is a self-escape tool that I think Ana players would love to have, and doesn't feel out of whack in comparison to the other tools most other supports have. And it's not something that's automatically good. You have to time it right in order to save yourself, which I think would just be very fun. Now, would it feel like kind of buzzkill for you to go in on a dive, think you're going to finish the Ana, and then she nanos herself? I guess. I still think that's like not a huge value play from the ultimate unless Ana then proceeds to pop off, which she can do with her sleep reset on cooldown. So it's a pure skill-based buff. Unlike some other supports where they just have a button that means they can't die, I still think you'd have to get some aggressive value because it's not like she does anything naturally. There's no auras on Ana, right? She doesn't exist and do something. She has to land and time her abilities, which I think is always going to be good for playmaking. I will note, this really feels like a Riot-style balance, which if you follow Riot games just a little bit, you'll see in everything they do, whether it's their new fighting game, Valorant, League of Legends, whatever, a lot of the design of the game is to create high skill ceiling pop-off moments, even if they're quite over the top. And the attitude is, if you have the skill to execute it, you get rewarded. And I just struggle to see if anyone would really have a problem if that's how Overwatch felt a little bit more, as opposed to the alternative, which is often supports feel so good because they just have the abilities to survive and counteract any aggression. That doesn't feel great. And one of the most powerful changes in that regard is to Brigitte, where Violet really came up with a ingenious solution here that I think is just better for all players at all levels. A big problem with Brigitte's balancing is that high-level players are masters of maximizing the Inspire aura, where I think lower-level players, their positioning isn't good enough, and frankly, their mechanics aren't good enough on Brig. People roll their eyes when I say that, but it's true. You really have to reach the skill floor of Brig's mechanics to guarantee that you will knock enemy Winstons away and hit the stun on time and never miss a flail and do all that, and then you can establish the OP Inspire healing. That design does not work for most players. In fact, it's more intuitive to use the repair pack charges because it's an active thing you have that you know you're giving to someone else and doesn't have all these other complex interactions where you have to be going and getting Inspire. Brig can still function as a healer without getting Inspire. She's just stronger when she does get it. Whereas for most players in the old version of Brig, you're just not using like half the character if you fail to manage Inspire properly. Brig gets Inspire from playing Brig well. If you're learning Brig and you can't play her well yet, well, it's like it's doubly worse and you just feel like you get run over by everything. Whereas I think this change that still incentivizes better Brig play but makes it less punishing for average level players means that you'll have a more gradual learning curve to Brig and can get out the fun that exists in this character. I've always enjoyed Brig's design. She's like the perfect style of mechanic character to me, liking tanks and positional play and cooldown interactions. I love that stuff. But what's always been a problem is just how forgiving she always was, and Blizzard really struggled to rein that in, and this kind of change, I think, would do that. Well, those are my favorite changes from the patch. This last part of the video, I just wanted to generally talk if this is a good strategy for Blizzard and what I think about this approach. I'll say some positives about it and also some worries. So a big positive is that if they actually use this experimental data to try out things and see people's response and decide how to develop the game better, that would be great. Because if they picked out some of these more fun interactions and put them into the game, I think it just makes the game better. But what I don't want to see is this be treated as like throwaway pseudo content, right? There has been, I think, a legitimate response online looking at a patch like this and wondering, do you actually think this is content, Blizzard? This is just a goofy pretend patch, like April Fools again, which people liked and a lot of people do enjoy. But for those of us who want the game to be taken seriously, it kind of feels insulting a little bit. I'm patient with it because I know everything they've gone through, and it's going to take a while, and we just got to let them work. So it's better than nothing, obviously. But my issue would be what I would rather see than just wacky character changes, which is a good start, but also bits and pieces from Overwatch 2 that they want to try out, give us a chance to trial, that are more ambitious than simply things that we're not supposed to take seriously. Like, I want to be able to take it seriously a little bit, especially format changes. You're going to need to strap in for a year of me ranting about this next subject, because I think it's vitally important for Overwatch 2's competitive viability, is they have to work on the format. This is the sequel, okay? It's supposed to feel new and fresh. My buddy SVB made a video recently where he toyed with the idea of, is hero swapping something that should not be in Overwatch? If you've watched this channel for quite some time, you might know why I tend to agree with that kind of radical change for the sequel. Does it have massive byproducts? Does it need a whole nother set of systems in order to make the game work and be fun? Yes, but I think we have to really take seriously the need of something like a hero draft coming into the sequel in order to add natural diversity into the gameplay, as opposed to needing radical new content or reworks in order to satisfy that novelty. And I don't have to be the one who's like fully right on what the right system is. I just want to see them toy with that kind of thing and take that seriously and not assume the modes and format we have now is all that we can have. I assume they are doing this, by the way. They're just not telling us and are being very guarded about what they want to try out. They're comfortable telling us about 5v5 because it's committed to. I want to peek behind the curtain of what else is cooking back there. With all the leadership change and seemingly change in philosophy, the attitude was all creators are essentially forum trolls and we don't have to take them seriously. Blizzard has taken great aims to try to curve that narrative and are going out of their way to treat us with respect now, but we'll see if that actually manifests into the game. The ball's in their court, so to speak. We shall see. This is all we have for now. So we'll have to all, as fans, take a deep breath and give them a chance to impress us next year, because with the pros playing in April on the new build of the game, there's got to be some momentum towards news around that time, and I look forward to that. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos go live, and be sure to check out our sponsored link in the description to head on over to GMG Glasses and take advantage of that Black Friday extended sale you only have until December 7th. To take advantage of those big discounts. So head on over and pick yourself up a pair and start protecting yourself from blue light today. I've been Frito for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.